So I've had the Meta Quest 2 for a little while now, and I've probably spent a little bit too much time inside the world inside this thing. But it is super cool, and in this video I'm going to break down my experience getting used to this thing, and what I love about it, and what might need to change. So to catch you up, this is my first time owning a VR headset, and having it at the palm of my hand so I can use it whenever I want. I experienced VR quite a few years back, having a go on a HTC Vive that was being demoed in a game store. And I got to tell you, when I did that ages ago, it completely blew my mind. I couldn't believe that I was inside a game. And since having the Quest 2 and re-experiencing it, it's just re-blowing my mind every single time. So essentially what it does is it just puts a screen in front of your face with two lenses on it to mimic actual vision. And it works in a similar way to how 3D glasses would work, making you see two different images at slightly different angles, and then that gives you that 3D perspective. It's exactly the same. Like the same way we would use 3D glasses to watch Spy Kids 3. You know, that film that was like the coolest thing ever when you were a kid, and then you realise growing up that it was actually pretty janky. Like, Frodo had a cameo in it. Remember that? Good times. Good times. Cake. Anyway, that is VR essentially. Come to think of it, Spy Kids 3 was actually about a VR game. We're living in Spy Kids 3 times. This changes everything. Anyway, essentially it mimics real vision and depth perception, and it puts you in a virtual world. But the beauty of it is that it tracks your motions and movements so well that it really mimics real life to a degree that is so immersive. So getting this was super cool, and what blows my mind more than the actual experience of it is the fact that it is all just contained inside the headset itself. Like, it does everything on its own. The cameras on the front track the room around you, so it tracks your movements. There's accelerometers and gyroscopes, and you got trackers on the remotes and stuff like that. It is really clever kit. But it processes everything and runs all the games internally, so you don't need a console, you don't need a gaming PC, you're just wearing the headset and that's it. But this is genuinely impressive technology. Even some of the simple minor touches make an absolutely huge difference to the immersion. For instance, when you pick something up in VR, the controllers vibrate, or they do it when you slice through like a block in Beat Saber. It gives you just a little small bit of tactile feedback that makes it feel like you're actually doing it. Like again in Beat Saber, if you touch your lightsabers together, your remotes vibrate like they're connecting. And even the fact that the controllers know whether you lift your thumb or your fingers off of the buttons that they're resting on. So you can actually point at someone and it actually mimics the movement of your hand surprisingly well. Now the controllers are actually a great shape to keep in immersion. The way you hold them feels very natural. Now you do get wrist straps on them, and that's perfect if you're playing a game where you're doing a lot of movement. You might accidentally drop or throw one of these. You want to be wearing the wrist straps. What would have been better is something which might have strapped it more tightly to your hand, so that if you did release them, they actually still continue tracking your hands and they're still attached to your hands. Maybe I'm asking too much, I don't know. But the way they are makes it really feel like you're clenching your fist, or you're holding a gun and firing the trigger. It's a very well thought out design. Now, if that isn't immersive enough for you, the headset actually supports hand tracking, which means if you put the controllers down and you're in a supported app, it will actually map your hands and you'll be able to use your hands in the game and pick things up like that, without having to have a controller. Now you may go through some of the same stages that I've gone through when you first get this. One of those experiences is to share it with everybody and get everyone to experience how cool this is. And what's amazing is that everybody reacts differently. Amazement, awe, fear. Also, some people pick up the games really naturally and they just sort of slip right into them. But then some people just can't help but run into a wall because they're just over immersed. Now, on the surface, other than watching the person react to the world they're in, there doesn't seem to be much of a communal experience going on here. And that is right to a degree. Obviously, only that person is playing the game, and it's not the easiest thing to be able to play multiplayer games locally. But you can set this up to be able to share what that person is seeing. You can share the vision to any device via a web browser, or you can do it to your phone that's connected with the Oculus app. You can also Chromecast it to TVs and devices that enable that as well. At the moment, there is no way of AirPlaying to something, that would be really cool, but unfortunately they don't do that right now. Now, if you do use the Oculus app to be able to see what that person's seeing, you can also do some basic controls from that app, so you can launch the person straight into apps without them having to navigate the menus, which is perfect if you're trying to throw your nan into VR and give her an early heart attack. Like, if you want, you can just straight up load up a Jurassic World thing, and then she's surrounded by dinosaurs, and she might die, but that's the risk that you're going to have to take. Now, as impressive as this thing is, it isn't perfect. Now, as the industry advances, I'm sure a lot of these things will get ironed out, but at the moment, you do have to be aware that this is still the start of ever-growing industry. Now, these things are quite important for you to know. First of all, the strap that comes with the headset isn't the best. It's not the most secure, and it's certainly not the most comfortable. It does the job, and I'm still using it, but it can be a bit fiddly, especially if you're switching it between people and you're constantly having to readjust the size of it. Now, you can get other straps from other companies, and I'm yet to try one of those, but I have heard that that is the way to go if you want to be serious about this, so that's something that I might need to invest in further down the line. But the problem is that it is a fine art learning how to adjust this thing. If you do it too tight, it's going to create a big tight mark on your face. If you do it too loose, it's going to constantly shift and budge, and things will go out of focus. So you really need to just over time get better at it. So bear in mind that it might take a little bit of time to get used to it if it keeps not being quite right initially. Now, lenses are great, and you don't really get much glare with them, but the adjustment for the lenses could be better. You essentially get 3 settings of width between the lenses, and you get to choose obviously number 1, 2 or 3 depending on how far apart your eyes are. Now, unless you're very lucky, your eyes won't perfectly match one of these 3. It'll probably be somewhere in between them. One of them will be the best option for you, but unless it perfectly matches, it's like wearing the wrong eye prescription. You might not notice it at first, but you're gonna start getting headaches if it's not right. So you got to make sure that you get it to the best one for you, and that might alleviate most of your problems. But if you just happen to be directly between the two and neither one is perfect, then you might find yourself potentially getting nauseous, or maybe potentially getting headaches if you wear this thing for too long. And I think that is something that I found quite weird to get used to. If I've used this thing for a few hours straight and I take it off, I need to be rubbing my eyes for like 10 minutes to sort of get back used to the real world and deal with the eye strain that I'm suffering. I think that is something that has gotten better the longer I've been using this and sort of switching between them. You do get used to it, but especially if you have it on the wrong setting, when you take it off, it just is a bit bizarre and doesn't quite work. Now, the next thing that could be seen as a negative, I think can also in a way be seen as a positive. This thing being wireless means that it has batteries on board, and the batteries don't last forever. Now, you could probably get 2 to 3 hours on this depending on what game you're playing and what your settings are like. Now, that may not seem like a lot, and if you're in a group and you're sort of taking turns playing with this, it does drain pretty quickly. But honestly, I assure you, it actually can be seen as a positive. Look, there are times where I could stay in this thing for hours and hours and hours, and if it didn't run out of battery, I probably would end up doing that. Some of the games are so immersive, and some of the sort of social experiences that you can do, you can just stay there for such a long time, exploring new worlds and new places and meeting new people. But this thing running out of battery actually forces you to take breaks to charge it, and that means that your eyes can get readjusted to the real world. You're not going to get headaches or not as nauseous than if you were just in this thing for hours. Like, having a break will not only be good for your eyes but also your mind. As good as these things are, it's important not to forget about the real world around you, and ultimately someone needs to feed the cat and take the kids to school. Now, after having this thing a little while, you can encounter a problem. You can very quickly run past the novelty of just being in a virtual world, and that become the normality, and then you're left wanting a bit more. Now, most games are behind a paywall. You need to pay for them in order for the developers to make them, and because there are a lot less people using VR than that are using Xbox and PS5 and gaming PCs, the creators can't just make these things for free all the time. Some of these companies need to charge to make these games in order to be able to afford to produce them. Now, there are positives about the store and there are negatives. Now, there aren't really any AAA games available on the Quest itself. I mean, the closest one to it, I think, is probably something like the Walking Dead game. Now, that is really good. It's got a decent story and there's tons of stuff you can do. But there isn't really any sort of game that you could be playing for hundreds of hours, like Skyrim or something like that, that is available to just standalone Quest users. Now ultimately, most games that you play on the Quest can be quite limited story-wise. For example, there is a Star Wars game with multiple episodes about Darth Vader, and you get an opportunity to use a lightsaber, and you go through a story and you meet Darth Vader and you use the Force, and that is a really cool concept. The problem is that in terms of the story in the game, you only really get about 30 minutes of game time, which doesn't really seem that much. Like, there are 3 episodes, so again, that helps. But if you've just bought one of the episodes, it can feel very short. The positive though is that if you are paying for all of these games, they are remarkably cheap in comparison to high-end console games. Instead of $59.99 for new release console games, you're paying very rarely more than 20 quid. For example, the Darth Vader game only costs $7.99, and that doesn't really seem like a lot. It adds up when you add the other episodes in, but then again, that's still a lot cheaper than a game that you might play on an Xbox, and it's VR, it's more immersive, and it's a more mind-bending experience when you're playing this game. I mean, I've got to say, in order to stand in front of Darth Vader and wield a lightsaber, it's worth it for that, surely. Now, a problem does stem here. There's a risk of just constantly spending money to get new and new experiences and keep that sort of novelty alive. And most people just can't do that, and there is going to be a chance you're going to bump into that boredom wall. Now, there is a ton of free content on here, and there are a bunch of social apps that have a load of games built into them as well. But ultimately, the best content on this thing does need to be paid for, and if you want to keep experiencing the best, you're going to have to keep buying new games. Now, even if you do keep buying these new games and moving on to a new experience and this and that and the other, there is still something missing: the social element. Now, this is where you can spend hours, days, weeks just losing yourself in a virtual world. The social apps where you can go and meet people and play games and have discussions with people from every corner of the world. It's bizarre. I mean, this type of experience isn't new. There's been social clubs in real life, and you've been able to play multiplayer games for years and years and years. But there is something about this that is slightly different. The fact that you're actually there in front of someone who is actually on the other side of the world, that is crazy, and you're meeting new people that you would never have probably met. There's a level of social interaction that, granted, isn't as good as an actual face-to-face conversation and you're just avatars, but it's a massive level up from talking in a chat room. And it allows you to put first impressions aside, like looks and smells. That doesn't necessarily matter. The only thing that does matter is the conversations that you have. And this is why I think it is incredibly easy to get past the novelty of VR, because of the variety of experiences that you can have. Now, despite how incredibly cool the games and the experiences are, you can get bored of them. But those human interactions that go way beyond other internet platforms, that ultimately is what draws you in and hooks you, and that's what makes us human. Now, I would say the Quest 2 is like the Nintendo 64 of VR gaming. We are at this crazy stage of VR development that over the next years, it is going to get better and more advanced and potentially more expensive. But this product is revolutionary, and the amount of capabilities it brings to the everyday user is just mind-blowing. An all-in-one wireless VR experience that is affordable if you're looking at a games console. That's something to be really excited about. Now, let alone the fact that you can actually connect the Quest 2 to a gaming PC and get improved graphics and performance from a gaming PC and get the exclusive games to Steam VR and stuff like that on your Quest that wouldn't be on it natively. That's just a bonus. But for the everyday user who's just going to have one of these and nothing else, I mean, it's a pretty good option. Considering the price of this and what it means for the industry, it's constantly getting updates. I think it's a fantastic purchase. Honestly, the Quest 2 is really, really good. And after about 100 hours, my thoughts on this are entirely positive. We have new games coming out, like at the moment, Bone Lab is being released, and that's going to be another step forward in gaming, and that is available natively on the Quest as well. We are truly in an exciting era of gaming and VR. And even though the Quest 2 isn't new, it is 100% worth it, and I would recommend it to anyone. Is it ready to replace a console, an Xbox, PlayStation, or a Quest 2? Now that is a question. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I'll see you in the next one. Whoop!